I love that. Good evening. It's 6:01. We are starting the board meeting. Mrs. Grease will not be attending. I don't need to say why. Okay. Okay, so first we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. Dr. Hawkins, would you like to lead us?
Sure. Stand, face the flag, put your hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Always brings me back to grade school when we say the,
Grade school?
yeah.
Word
Okay.
only?
All right. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda for this evening, February 21st, 2023?
So moved. Oh, sorry, Matt.
Please move.
Do I have a
Second.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, this evening. Oh, public comment first. Okay. Does anybody here have public comments? No? Okay, we have one public comment online, Mr. Petzold. Mr. Petzold, can you raise your hand and we'll bring you up to the. Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay, all right, Mrs. Dahl will, but you know,
You may begin.
So how many minutes do I get? 5?
3, the same as usual.
Okay, well, I just wanted to comment. I was very disappointed in the agenda and that there was something called a hearing session that did not refer at all to public comment. And for those who just don't know how to do this, it doesn't appear that there is an area for public comment. So, and you have to click on it to find out the rules for public comment. So I wish that could be identified a little bit better. I did want to talk about AB 300. It's amazing to me that you just went through $148 million of double E money and that we are talking about doing earthquake safety upgrades. How did you do all of that work at these schools with the state architect not requiring you to do the safety upgrades required by AB 300? I'm really concerned about all the work that has been done at that school. If you go ahead with these seismic upgrades, what happens to the work that you've already done, especially at Santa Clarita School and Cedar Creek? So I would like to hear what will happen to those upgrades. What will happen to those schools? Are you still using Measure Double E funds at those schools, even though you know you have to do seismic upgrades that might require the buildings to be torn down? I would like an answer to that question. I want to know what happens if, I know that you're setting the table for another bond issue in 2024, and I'm watching that very closely. I don't know what the dollar amounts are. Look at the escalation of the costs that are going on. I tried to read your table, and you know what? I only have so much time in a day. I don't know how any of you prepared for this meeting. The cost escalations are just beyond what I feel that this community can afford at this time. I'm very disappointed that we're at this point where what should have been done first is being done last as an afterthought. And I think this community deserves better. And with that, I look forward to your presentation tonight. I may be in and out, but I am watching. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Petzold.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's no other comments, I will turn it over to Mr. Heinlein.
Right.
Good evening, board. Tonight, we will give a facilities update. We'll talk about where we are with AB 300. We'll give an update on our new big buildings that are in process, and then go over future projects and projects that we have recently finished. So AB 300, what is AB 300? It's Assembly Bill 300 that was passed in 1999, and it required the Department of General Services, that's the state department, to conduct an inventory of K-12 public school buildings that featured concrete tilt-up construction and non-wood frame walls that did not meet the minimum requirements of the 1976 Uniform Building Code. So really that's school buildings that were built with cinder block or brick or anything like that. In 2003, the department published their list of 7,537 school buildings in California that they felt required a first level structural analysis to determine and make sure that those buildings really did need to be on the list. Then in 2006, California voters approved Prop 1D to create a source of funds for districts to work on the seismic repair, reconstruction, or replacement of school buildings that were on the list. And like most state programs, not everything is paid for or funded. This program is only 50% funded. So the other thing we like to mention is that since 1933, when the Field Act passed, all public schools are built to a higher building code requirement than most other structures that are built in our state. So the first time that we brought this information to the board was in November 16, 2021. And it was a lot of information, some of which we will go over again this evening. After that, shortly after that, we had a parent meeting for Santa Clarita Elementary. Then we had a second presentation to the governing board that was very specific about funding and the funding options that we had to try to address these needs. Then not too many months ago, the board created some guiding principles for us on how to work on projects that are currently at these AB 300 sites, but projects that still kind of need to be done. Then we have had parent meetings at the other 5 elementary school sites regarding this.
No, other than this is part of my goals for the year, which is really talking with the community about this even further. We spoke with each one of the schools and answered some of the questions. We also posted recorded copies of the presentation for the general community via Parent Square. So anybody who couldn't come was able to process. And I know this last couple of weeks, we've specifically noticed in the AB 300 school sites, parent newsletters and things to participate in tonight's event. So that's why I think we see so many people online as well as here tonight.
Okay, what are our requirements? So these come from our legal counsel. This is really the only slide that he spoke about when he was here in November. And these are his words. So once a school building is on the AB 300 list, is identified by an engineer as needing seismic retrofitting or upgrades, the district must take affirmative action. So we need to develop a plan to address the needed work, right? So we need to have a scope, which is kind of what we're working on this evening. We need to have our estimates of costs, which are really changing every single day, and then kind of think about and factor in potential issues like temporary housing or consolidating campuses while the work is going on, stuff like that. And the other major component is figuring out how to fund the repair or replacement of the buildings. Do we use only bonds? Do we access the seismic mitigation program? Is there other type of funding that we can search for and get to help us fix this? So the Department of State Architect is our, for lack of a better term, permitting agency, right? So we go and submit all of our construction drawings to them. And once they approve them, then we have the ability to go out and actually build something. DSA, Division of State Architect, they have a process. This is called their process 08-03, which is the one you have to follow if you choose to try and access the state mitigation program dollars. So that's what we've been doing. Phase 1 is to verify eligibility. And that was done on November 16th. So we have done that, but I did want to go over just what buildings we're actually talking about on the campuses.
Mr. Herman, can you go back up to that slide real quick? And it's important to notice that that process is $1,000 DSA fee per building on the campus,
Which we've already paid.
which we've already paid.
Okay, so the first site was Cedar Creek. And all of the buildings A, B, C, D, E, and F, those are all listed on the AB 300 school site list. When we move to Sky Blue, the sister campus of Cedar Creek, so it's the same exact buildings that are on the list. Moving on to Emblem, have the main admin building, which is A, B is a kindergarten building, and F is the multipurpose building. Those three are on the list. A, B, C, D, and E. This is at Rio Vista. Those are all on the list. And then Rio Vista's sister campus is Rosedale. So the same buildings on that campus.
I think it's important too to highlight, even though we have sister campuses in two situations, remember seismic issues are not only about the building, it's about the ground that it sits on. So since they're in different locations, the remedy may need to be different depending on the campus that we're at.
And then Santa Clarita, A, B, C, D, and E. So the entire part of the older campus. So on the actual list, which I have a copy of right here, actually we had 7 school sites on the list, but during that engineer verification process, we were able to determine that Highlands does not belong on the AB 300 list. So again, the other thing that was done at the November 16th meeting is the board provided us guidance on which phase was preferred for each of the buildings that were on the list. So the phasing is either phase 2 or phase 3. Phase 2 being a replacement of the building, phase 3 being the rehabilitation of the building. And so since then, we've been working on gathering the required submittals, which might impact that decision that was made in November. So with that being said, I need to go on Zoom. And bring in one of our architects, Ed Avila from SGH. I'm going to promote him as a panelist. Hal Hart, our architect partner from HMC. I need to bring him in. And then Mr. Josh Randall, our structural engineer. He works for both of those firms. I'm going to bring him in as well. Okay. How we can see you. I'm going to go back to screen sharing. There's Mr. Randall and there's Ed.
Good evening. Can you hear us?
We can hear you.
All right. You let me know when you're ready.
Okay, the first one of our sites is Cedar Creek. This site is one that belongs to our SGH partner, and Ed has an update for us on that site.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Nick. Someone spoke earlier about the sister site, so I get to be the first to talk about Cedar Creek and then Sky Blue, all identical original buildings. Literally the same set of drawings was prepared back in the 60s. Over 50 years old, these structures have been around. But here we are applying them to two different sites, and they are coming up with two very unique results or ending results and how to go back and update them. As Nick was mentioning, part of the requirements to go to DSA required us to refresh a few bits of information, and one of them, of course, is the geotechnical investigation. So for both campuses, I'll kind of speak to both at the same time, but the marching orders was the same. We got drill rigs out there. We got the geotech team, the geohazard team involved in pulling samples, going back to the lab, testing those samples against new code requirements or the latest code requirements, which is what DSA is basing these improvements on. The soil liquefaction and induced settlement conditions at Cedar Creek are quite significant compared to Sky Blue. That basically means in an earthquake or an earth-shattering event, the soil has the capability of turning, into a liquid or jello-like format, which these structures were never designed for. Back in the day, liquefaction was probably not a word that was used very often. So the significant improvements that would be required to bring up those 6 structures is either touching the foundation system, which in this case is almost impossible because you literally have to replace the foundation system. So imagine trying to keep a building standing up while you're replacing the footings, the slab work, all of that, and reconnecting everything back together. And it just seems, hopeless and useless. It would be more economical to replace it than to do that. The other option, which is a little bit more reasonable, but still not exact science, is soil bearing capacities. And it is a specialty in the industry to inject materials into the soils to strengthen them in a manner where liquefaction is deterred or minimized in some way. And I'm saying all these things. I'm the architect, but I'm also looking at our engineer and making sure that I'm saying things. And Josh, you have the right to jump in and make sure that I'm being as clear and basic as possible. But it's quite involved to be able to stand back, look at these soil reports, and figure out how to apply some of these solutions. The soil bearing capacity solution, as I said, an injected soils improvement stability approach that is hit or miss. There's a little bit of risk in all of that. Are you improving the soils in the right places? Obviously, that would mean poking the site around in very numerous locations, injecting the soils, and then needing to retest those soils to make sure that it actually worked. So the least that we could do for the cost estimate and the evaluation process for Cedar Creek was to at least focus on the soil bearing capacity that had the better opportunity, and then do the best we could to formulate costs and impacts and schedules to improve those conditions. We also went back and updated our cost estimates that we had done the previous year or 2 years prior to that. Obviously, costs are changing very quickly. So the cost to understand what the compacted grouting to address the soils improvements is the first cost refresh. The second, of course, were all the other seismic upgrades that needed to happen. So it's not just the soil improvements. There are roof connections, there are wall to floor connections, There are other things that throughout each one of these buildings that need some kind of improvement. So it's when you, of course, when you get to a structural improvement, and I'm kind of describing what has to happen to all of these structures. You've got to generally got to rip off the aesthetics, whether it's the exterior or the interior, to get to the structural components to do the work. So you're spending money taking things apart to expose those weaknesses. You're spending money to improve on those weaknesses, and then you're spending money again to put it all back together. And at the end of the day, you're getting what you had. Most of these improvements won't have a visual impact, but there won't be any architectural improvements in it either. Third bullet was also going back and updating the costs to make those other improvements, right? We knew that we had connection improvements and other conditions that had to take place. We went back because costs are, like I said earlier, the costs are changing as we speak, time of day kind of situation. We tagged those costs, and we made those updates as well. And fortunately, the replacement costs by DSA, they changed their cost too. They understood there was a cost impact. So for us to evaluate what our costs versus what DSA thinks those costs could be, that's part of this game of understanding how much things cost and whether they are replaced or whether they're renovated. The last item, of course, is estimates are confirmed on the structures of the AB 300 list for this campus are not eligible for rehabilitation funding. So generally what we're saying is we've exceeded the cost for rehabilitation for funding mechanism. There actually pushes us in a category where rehabilitation is more favorable on these 6 structures. You want to hit the next slide? And the approach was basically the same with Sky Blue. The results were different. Liquefaction isn't as much of an issue out there. It can be remediated through the foundation systems. The update recommendations were incorporated in the cost of both. We looked at both replacement and rehabilitations. As I said, liquefaction was existing, but not the challenge. And in this case at Sky Blue, and as we're doing it, as we've done at Cedar Creek, you can still design correctly foundation systems that do work for code compliance and meet the site conditions. The MPR at Sky Blue is classic new building meeting those current requirements. Those costs are automatically incorporated into the design, but the foundation systems are quite and are dramatically different than systems are. Sky Blue's, go ahead, Nick.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say Sky Blue's approach to seismic mitigation will be foundation improvements, will be those connection points at walls to foundations, roofs to exterior walls, to basically tying the building together better and anchoring it to the ground better. That's really what it's about. It's holding the building to the earth. And we did the same exact thing. We refreshed all the costs, not only the cost to do the work, but the cost to the comparable costs that DSA has for their CRCs. And we do exceed the 50%, but we think that there is a meaning. I'm sorry, let me back up. We do exceed the 50% for replacement. We do, those buildings do fall into the replacement category, but it's a borderline approach. And I think the answer would be that we approach improving those buildings, not necessarily replacing those buildings, but we would take that on a slow basis. And as Nick is saying, our next step would be to knock on the doors of DSA with whatever direction we choose to go forward with. And we have to convince DSA that our approach is valid and viable as well. And that's the future phase. That would be the next step. But that gives us the updates on at least these 2 campuses.
Thank you, Ed. Up next is Emblem. This is Hal's site.
Sure. Good evening, and thanks, Nick, and good evening, board members. At Emblem Elementary School, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm kind of dealing with a little bit of a sickness here, but apologize in advance for coughing. We had, in the June of 2022, we had some geotechnical work done, which was not previously done. And, you know, the good news there is that there were no recommended changes to the structural rehabilitation that was initially recommended back in phase one. So therefore, we did not have the liquefaction issues that Ed spoke about on Cedar Creek. Excuse me. So not having to worry about any additional scope. Basically, the scope of work identified was structural connections to enhance resistance to shear forces, as well as, again, pinning the building foundation to the earth to meet minimum requirements. We updated the cost estimates and we escalated those to June of 2025. And as Ed mentioned, we updated the value that DSA updated regarding the cost to construct, the cost of replacement of schools. They updated their costs to reflect more current market conditions. So we updated all of our spreadsheets and values, and we came up with that a seismic rehabilitation for the 3 buildings at Emblem, which are A, B, and F, are eligible for submission to DSA under phase 3 seismic rehabilitation funding. And we presented those figures in the spreadsheet that we provided to the district.
Hey, moving on to Rio Vista.
Rio Vista, sister school with Rosedale. Again, we feel lucky as well in that the geotechnical reports that were done in June of 2022 did not reflect any substantial issues regarding liquefaction or the need to modify the scope of work regarding soils, earthwork, or foundation work. Having taken that information, we did update the previous estimates to current estimates, reflecting a June 2025 escalation factor, and we updated the current replacement cost to current DSA values. You know, we have the buildings at Rio Vista, B, C, D, and E are eligible for rehabilitation funding. Again, it's mainly looking at structural connections to the vertical and horizontal structural members, increasing their resistance to shear forces from seismic activity, and making sure the foundations are properly anchored to the ground. We did at Rio Vista look at the cost of the rehabilitation for the kindergarten building, building A, and in that case, those costs did exceed 50% replacement value. And at Rio Vista, we recommended replacement option for building A only, again with B, C, D, and E eligible for rehabilitation phase 3 funding. And Rosedale being very similar to Rio Vista in a sister school, although a different site, so there's no guarantees there, as was previously mentioned. We feel we dodged a bullet here as well, in that there were no recommended changes to any made structural rehabilitation, which would impact the scope of work for footings, foundations, site work, excavation, etc. So we updated the cost, updated the current replacement values with DSA numbers. And very similar to Rosedale or to Rio Vista, Rosedale has buildings B, C, D, and E eligible for rehabilitation funding, with building A, the kindergarten building, exceeding the 50% cost of work to replacement value, so therefore triggering a phase 2 replacement option for building A only. Santa Clarita, back at phase 1, it was determined based on the initial reports that this building was really scheduled for a phase 3 replacement. And at this point, we did no further work pending decision on the board with regards to the status of the elementary school. But the recommendation from the ASB 300, the seismic mitigation program, is that the Santa Clarita Elementary School exceeds the 50% cost of refurbishment to replacement value, and therefore is recommended for replacement if the building is to remain.
Okay, thank you. So in summary, after the district architects and structural engineers completed the required submittal portion to DSA for either phase 2 or phase 3, we recommend that the board change the preferred phase for each of the buildings at Cedar Creek from phase 3 to phase 2. That is really the only change after going through this initial process. Then there's a brief funding update. And really it's some more details about the seismic mitigation program, which we keep talking about. Again, this program was established in 2006. It's administered by the State Allocation Board and staffed by the Office of Public School Construction. There are two things you really have to know in order to really know how the program works. The first is this OPSC replacement value. So we'll get into the example later, but there is a very generic cost per square foot for a building and cost per square foot of a restroom building that is used to establish a replacement value. It is very generic. The other thing you have to know is the cost to do the rehabilitation work of the building. Once you know those two things, you just compare them, right? So if that cost of rehabilitation is less than half of the replacement value, the state will fund that project as a rehab project. It doesn't mean the board has to rehab the building. The state is only going to give you what the formula churns out. Seismic programs are health and safety programs, and they go to the top of the line for processing by the state. So if for some reason we were able to submit our projects right now, we had all the construction drawings done, Ed and Hal stayed up all night to draw them, and we submitted them tomorrow, we'd probably get funded, right? Because the state's taking some general fund money and putting it into building programs. So we would probably be in good shape. A year from now, not sure, right? So that's the good part about this program, is because these projects do go to the top. Again, the cost benefit analysis for each building determines the funding type, nothing more. And the funding type, again, does not dictate the scope of the work or what we have to do, right? So if we qualify for replacement funding, that doesn't mean we have to replace it. I think the discussion becomes harder. I think Josh will tell us that, right? That convincing DSA that we can spend the replacement money on rehabbing a building sometime might not be a very easy discussion to have with them, and they might not allow it. And replacement funding will result in modernization, eligibility, recalculation, and reduction. So in the school facility world, the state gives money for new construction. And then after a permanent building reaches 20 years of age, we start to accumulate modernization eligibility, right? So if we get into the seismic program and are awarded funds to rehab a building, it's going to take away that modernization eligibility. We've talked about it, that it requires a match, right? So, you know, if we decide to replace a building, but the building only qualifies for rehabilitation funding from the state, our match is not 50% anymore, right? It's going to be much higher because they're not going to provide that 50% for replacing the building. And we have to have all agency approvals in place before our funding application can be submitted. And there is this interim step called conceptual approval, but really it doesn't put you in line for funding. It's probably not something we would want to do.
Mr. Heinlein, can I have you clarify? It says a 50% state funding match. That's based on the formula of what the value it would cost to rebuild it. It's not based on a 50% match of what it actually cost to build it. Going out to an architect and building it?
The 50% match is directly in reference to it being funded as or qualifying as a rehabilitation program or a replacement program, all tied to the OPSC dollar formula.
But that is not necessarily the actual cost of rebuilding or replacing the building, correct?
Correct.
Can we back up and clarify that a little bit more?
Can we try this example?
We're gonna do the example next.
Okay, cool.
I want,
Thank
I
you.
saw it say 50% and 50%, and I want everybody to understand that while it says 50%, if we go out to bid and it's gonna cost $50,000 to replace the building. 20 or
What I thought it was. I was
20.
trying to be eloquent when I said, huh?
Okay, so this slide also mirrors this very large spreadsheet, which I tried to make clear, but I know a lot of numbers kind of makes everything hard to see. So this first example is just for one building, building A at Cedar Creek. Column A is the site, column B is the building, column C is the square footage of just the typical square footage. D, which for this building, there are no restrooms in that. That's why that's 0. Column E is this OPSC replacement value. And when we first spoke about this with the board, at that time, the values were $412 for typical construction and $742 for restroom. So it's just a multiplication problem at that point, right? At that time, the minimum cost estimate to rehabilitate the building was 1.9 million. So you just take the ratio of those, right? So 1.9 million divided by 2.5 million is 74.9%. So right there tells you where the state will put that in the seismic mitigation program, right? Over 50% means they will fund it half of the replacement cost. And that replacement cost is E. It may not be the actual replacement cost. I is the estimated replacement cost. Back then, we were using about $741 a square foot. And the board preferred that we rehab the building, which the cost there is just the same as column F, right? That's the rehabilitation cost at that time. And then L, it was the funding needed after you consider state funds, right? So remember, time is going to be of the essence whenever this work is done. A big factor is going to be, will the district have to pay the whole cost and then get in line for the reimbursement? Or can it happen concurrently? That's always a big question. So the current update after tonight's presentation, right? So we have a shift in the OPSC replacement values. The 2022 rates were 477 and 859. And
That's the blue part,
in the blue,
portion of the slide. Okay.
and oh, by the way, those have changed, right? So there's always, everything is constantly changing, right? So I know for 2030 or 2023, the rates are going to be 521 and 939. But I didn't want to use that because our current estimates are from last year as well. Okay, so I'm just trying to keep everything as consistent as we can. Now the rehabilitation cost has been increased based on the seismic knowledge that we have in that geotechnical work that was done. So now the work with Josh and Ed, they calculate the minimum required work to be $3 million. So really now we're over 100%. So really, when you look at the cost, that's why we will recommend changing it from a phase 2 to a phase 3. But it does increase the cost, but it also increases the money we would receive from the state.
Now, Nick, is that for a brand new 21st century like building, or is for a building that?
I think you're a few slides too early.
Oh, okay, I'll wait.
Okay, so this was just a look at the estimated costs from when we looked at this in November, and then looking at the current update. So again, costs have been increasing. We think all of us are aware of that in all facets of life. Everything is getting more expensive. But we see a large shift, but most of that large shift is changing how we thought we could treat Cedar Creek. When, you know, again, with this big, large spreadsheet that really goes through every single building, when you look at the replacement cost, it's really the cost to replace the same exact building in the same place. If we're going to consider rebuilding buildings, it makes a lot of sense to take into consideration all the changes that have happened in educational programs and really redesign a campus that would greater meet the needs of our students. But of course, the consideration of redesigning a school also comes with increased costs. We know right now that a new elementary school is somewhere between $40 and $45 million. And so on the left is, of course, a newer aerial picture of Cedar Creek. And on the right is a proposed rendering of what the school could look like. This is really changing the campus from what it was and how it was built in the 60s to one that is probably more closely matches educational programs and how they're delivered today. Okay, are there any questions or comments related to AB 300 that would be beneficial to keep our architects and structural engineer online to answer?
I have some for you, but not for them.
Okay.
I guess my question really is about timeline for next steps on the AB 300 decisions to get the process rolling to get into the queue, because that's, I think, the next sort of step in the process.
That's not a question necessarily for the gentleman.
Okay.
I did have a question that might be for them. When we talked about Rosedale, Emblem, and Rio Vista, the report indicated that the cost escalation is estimated through 2025. Is that true for the other schools as well? Or are those current dollars?
Ed, can you help answer
Yes.
that?
Yeah, that's correct. We factored in the same escalation. We're also using the same cost estimating team. So we're all apples to apples here.
Fantastic. That was extremely helpful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I just have one question. Comparing Cedar Creek and Sky Blue Mesa, I know Sky Blue Mesa, you said the liquefaction is mitigatable, but is that something that can ever get worse over time?
That's a good question, but that's a good question for a geologist. I don't know, maybe Josh, you can cover that. I don't know. I don't think that gets worse. I think we just learn that things get worse and how to prevent our structures from collapsing is our reaction to all of that. But go ahead, Josh.
Liquefaction is a function of the type of soil that underlies the building and the water level, of the groundwater level. And CGS, the California Geologic Survey, has requirements that require the geotechnical engineer to use the historic high groundwater. And they'll usually note where it was encountered and what the historic high was. The only way to really change the liquefaction potential under a building is for the water table to exceed the historic high, which, given the direction California's headed, I don't think that's ever going to happen. For the most part, groundwater has gone down throughout the state, so the chances are slim to none that it would ever go in the wrong direction.
Thanks. That's it.
Well, thank you, guys. I will move you back to the attendee list.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to take the other questions in order? Then we can go to Ms. Love and work our way back.
Does he want to continue the presentation?
Well, we're going to answer the questions on this portion first. We
Oh,
were just
okay.
letting our team
Specialists get off.
specialists go.
Okay, so now we have non-geology questions.
No
Ms. Love.
geology question. So I guess my biggest question is, in terms of changing Cedar Creek from rehabilitation to replacement, have we considered and do we have answers as to what that means in terms of the current student population on campus? Whether we'll be able to replace the buildings in such a way that students won't have to be moved to another campus, or do we not know that yet?
So Nick, do you want to go back to that drawing? So this right here is
I'm not screen sharing.
just a screen share so that the public can see what we're talking about. You see in the drawing or schematic of the school on the right, if you look at the sort of beige building that's there, building A, I think it says. That is do you have a little,
You talking about
Dot?
this?
no, that beige one,
This one?
this one, where the red dot is. Are you following the red dot? That is the current multipurpose room. Okay. So that is a fixed space. It's a brand new building, so that would remain. When you see the picture on the left, you can see all the old buildings. But if you look at the picture on the right, where Mr. Heinlein is going to move his little red dot to the building, little pink building in front of that. See it? That would be the new office space. Then below that would be our kindergarten TK wing and play area. Our edible schoolyard would be to the right of that, which is already planned and in process. And then above in the very large, that's our flex science lab. And then if you go to the very large building up here, that would be the new classroom structures. So what would happen is we worked with the architect to allow us to be able to house the students on the campus while it was reformatted so that everybody could stay where they are, but we could adjust to the new concept.
So the first building that would be built is this large 2-story classroom building. And then that would allow us to start to work on these buildings in order to make
In order to tear down old part of the campus and replace it. So yes, we've looked at that.
And I suppose based on the presentation, that Cedar Creek is our most pressing concern.
Well, I think from my perspective, Santa Clarita was also a pressing concern, but until we had our current geological or geotechnical data, it was the only pressing concern. Now, based on the new pressing concern and the escalating costs, I think they're all equally as concerning, depending on the community that you live in, for how we have to address this.
Okay, that's it for me for the moment. Might have one.
Thanks.
So,
Mr.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Mr. Drunky.
So
Timeline.
I'll ask my question again. I think the next most important step is to get all of these projects into the queue with the state to start that process. All the while we continue to make other decisions about what exactly we want to do at each site based on whether it's a replacement or a rehabilitation.
At the first meeting in March,
I believe.
first board meeting in March, we will ask the board to approve the phasing for each one of these buildings. That will set in motion the applications and the work that needs to be done with our team and DSA. When that process is over, we will have a letter that says, okay, this project, how it is approved for this funding. The next step is the project application. At that step, you have to have complete construction drawings, right? So, but in order to have complete construction drawings, we really are going to need to know exactly what we're building. That's going to have to be figured out. And we're going to have contracts with all the architects that need to start drawing those. So there's going to be a cost for that, that we potentially wouldn't see any funding back from until we go through the process of getting the state mitigation program funding, or we secure other fundings by a bond or something like that.
So I think it's really important for us to get in the queue as is described, but it's quite a commitment on the part of the district for providing the funding and really knowing that this is the direction that we're going to go and when. So I think when we're looking at next phases, yes, in March, we're going to give you an approved recommendation of the next round of phasing. That's around $2,000 a building to submit.
There's 30 buildings.
And there's 30 buildings to submit for approval from DSA. And then we have to go into major architectural drawings and constructions, which I think is a piece that last spring, when we talked about the potentiality moving forward of talking with the community about how we would need to fund this, it was very difficult to do because we didn't have some of those very specific answers. And I think over this next probably 6 to 12 months, you're going to see us gathering those answers so that we can have a better decision. But I think we have to move forward with it in a lot of ways, as if there were no funding and we were going to be able to provide all of it up front. And so that's harder to rush out into that queue when, you know, you're talking about full architectural drawings. We were just to take it as is with what we talked about last fall, redeveloping 2 schools completely, looking at a variety of other things. And then Mr. Heinlein and I are going to talk in a little while about a couple of other needs that we have to look at.
After the March meeting, the thought is that DSA will take 6 to 9 months before we get that letter.
And then I suppose at the same time, you sort of hit on it a little bit, is that we have to start thinking about separately the funding track of what that timeline is going to look like.
So
And that's a whole separate set of decisions that have
Right.
to be made along the way.
I think identifying the issue, right, was what we did a year ago. Now we're identifying what the scope of the issue is with the liquefaction and the construction needs and all of that. We've always known that these were very costly things to address. We also have known that the idea of universal transitional kindergarten was going to change our facilities needs. And Mr. Heinlein is currently working on Americans with Disabilities Act audit because we've had several instances where we've been asked to have those things looked at. And so we want to be able to do that throughout our schools if we're going to go through this sort of major process. So we want to bring all of that as we consider funding, because I think Mr. Petzel's concern over making sure that we're being responsible with taxpayer dollars is a key factor. We don't want to go into this willy-nilly. We don't want to go into this without a plan that we can really share with the community. It will ultimately be a decision that they help us make as we move forward. But as you saw, $40 million for one of the schools, just doing the math right there, there's 2 schools that would need to be addressed. And then there is the addressing that we saw at our last meeting with the Davis demographics piece and where we are with that. And so when we look at having 15 schools moving forward, do we continue with 15 schools? Do we re-boundary our schools because of what we're seeing with our new development across the freeway and the possibility that we will not really qualify for that Entrada school that we thought 20 years ago was a slam dunk? How do we do that? And what does that do to the demographic information? And so those are all things that we have to consider. They're all moving parts that make it difficult to just say, oh, we'll just have one meeting and make one set of recommendations and gosh, you guys will decide and here we go. So it is going to be a process, but we're trying to do it in as fast a process to avoid the escalation and achieve the funding, because we know that the state is looking for another bond possibly to pass. And that if that were to happen, that would be really good for us, but we're not quite certain that they're, even if we get approved, that we'll have all the funds available to us, even though we would be eligible for them. So again, back to, you have to be able to have the dollars to pay for the project upfront.
Yeah, just a fun fact. When we finished Plum, was it a year and a half, 2 years ago? We think we'll get our funding this month. So,
It takes a while.
yeah.
Yes.
You use a Discover card, you get cash back.
And then only one other question. I was just curious. Rosedale has that extra building that Pleasant View uses. Is that subject to AB 300 and was that building checked?
It's not on the list.
It's not on the list.
It's important to remember that these are for concrete tilt-up cinder block buildings. That is a wood frame construction building. So it's not on the list, but it's also like not supposed to be on the list because.
Dry Canyon is on the list. Honby's on the list.
What? Things we don't own anymore.
Yeah.
That's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Watson.
Okay, I have quite a bit. I'm Matt Watson. Have we met? So first of all, I just want to say I'm grateful that we decided to set aside this time for a special meeting. Nobody gets excited about about extra meetings, but we're talking about some really important things that affect our school families and communities and our community at large in exceptional ways. And so I'm glad that we didn't just wedge it in with a couple of other dozen things on a general meeting.
And you bring up a really good point. This is a community at large and we're addressing ours. It is truly, 7,500 buildings across the state. It's not just Saugus that has this issue to address.
I appreciate that because I'm going to allude to that in just a minute. But I am glad that we're taking this time because it's not just a simple, well, Nick, what's cheaper? Let's do that, right? Because these have some deep ramifications for our district. And so I want our community to know that our district and our school board don't take these decisions lightly. And I'm not going to run the risk. I'm just outright going to ask questions that have been asked and answered before, because I think these things bear repeating. Because our community needs to know every step along the way of what's going to be a long process of what's going on and why we're doing certain things. So first of all, can you remind us why Highlands has been crossed off? Why they are not on this list anymore?
Sure. So again, that process that the Department of General Services went through was really just reviewing paperwork, right? And so when you go to Highlands, you'll notice that there's a lot of CMU concrete masonry units that are all around the building on the exterior. And so it would appear that that building should be on the list. So the first phase or the first step in going through this process is a structural engineer goes out there and really looks at the building. So when that happened, he said, oh, these are just for decoration. The wood framing of this building is really what's providing the structural integrity. It's not these blocks that are on the outside.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And while we have discussed before that we still and always will exist inside the state of California and nothing is ever guaranteed, this isn't a list of schools that aren't safe. These are a list of schools that need retrofitting or reconstruction to make them safer.
Correct.
Okay,
The
fantastic.
freeway.
Right. And I appreciate that. And it's good and right that our schools should be the safest buildings around.
Or the hospitals or
Mhm.
any other public buildings that are used as refuge buildings when a major disaster happens.
Okay.
That's the intention of it.
All right. Now, I do want to get into some of the things that the two of you have alluded to, as well as some of the questions that Mr. Petzl brought to our attention this evening and some of my own. The timeline is interesting. You said this is based on a law passed in 1999 that we as a board discussed for the first time in 2021.
Mhm.
And we have been conducting studies for the last year or so and are still not 100% certain exactly how much needs to be spent. And then once we are, we don't know how much those dollars are going to be worth in a couple of years when the work gets done. There's a lot of uncertainty. But can you kind of bridge that gap between 1999 and 2021 for us? Was this a law that was passed that we just sat and stared at for 20 years?
I don't know if
None of us know.
Yeah.
that was it. I will tell you that there are many school buildings that still have not been addressed.
Mhm.
I think a lot of districts looked at it as an unfunded mandate, right? Like, oh, well, thank you for telling me this, but now how am I really supposed to fix it? Because statewide, you're going to have to expect at least 50% from your community, right?
Mm.
So I know for us, the historical story that I have heard is that none of this work was in and part of Measure EE. After Measure EE was passed and the district began working on the master facilities plan, we see that it says seismic investigation, right?
Mhm.
So that's the line item, or it's close to the wording that's in the master facilities plan. Mr. Trunky might have more information about how that got in the plan. I have been told it's because our previous director of facilities came from a district whose total bond program was nothing but AB 300 work. And so when he arrived here, he said, you guys should probably look at this.
But for us,
No, I think that's exactly right.
of course, we were following the master plan and we were doing things. And we began looking at Sky Blue and Cedar Creek to reformat the offices, to make them 21st century spaces that really accommodated the way we have single point of entry and those sorts of things. Unfortunately, in Mr. Petzl's comment about touching the buildings, we couldn't redo those buildings without addressing the AB 300 needs. Now you can paint them and you can put new air conditioning units on them and new flooring and all that sort of stuff. But when you start moving around walls and things, suddenly you have to address the AB 300 needs. Mr. Heinlein and I, being good stewards of the district and the needs, decided that right as COVID began, we would go forward with a full evaluation of all of the buildings, which then triggered the process that we're in now, because now we have to continue to move forward. We no longer can wait as we had done for 21 years prior.
So with kids being sent home from school, essentially, kids and staff, that seems like a really good decision. Let's go in and take a look at our buildings now. It's very convenient to do that. And then once we became aware of what we became aware of when we looked at the buildings, we can't just go, whoops, that's really expensive and sit on it. It's like smelling something funny in your kid's bedroom and saying, you know what, maybe we should have someone come out and look for mold. And they say, yeah, there's mold. And you saying, well, I can't pay for that now.
Yeah, we have to
So-
look for a solution.
Yeah.
And it's a hard solution. And so the solution we would have presented to you, or we did present to the board over a year ago, was one solution, but it was an imperfect solution because it was based on the initial engineering work. Now we're presenting it based on the geotechnical work, which is really where the rubber meets the road with earthquakes. And that's what we're looking at. This isn't about fault lines or anything like that. It's about concrete, inflexible construction on land that may not allow us to retrofit.
Okay. And I appreciate that. And to the Measure EE funding question, I've seen it multiple times on our agendas as we come together twice a month. We're not, well, let me ask it as a question. Are we painting walls that we're planning on tearing down? And that's an oversimplification. I've seen on our agendas on multiple occasions that we've changed Measure EE projects based on AB 300 realities, correct?
That was the, when we had the meeting in October, looked for guiding principles from the board in order to address some of the issues that you're talking about. Like, we'll look at pictures later this evening of Cedar Creek, right? But we know Cedar Creek is an AB 300 site, right? We also knew that the inside of those classrooms hadn't been painted in more than 20 years.
Mhm.
We know that paint lasts for 10 years, right? So you have to do some type of an evaluation to say, okay, well, even if we use it for 5 or 6 years, the kids that are there now deserve to have freshly nice painted rooms. And we want to be okay with doing that work.
And so the board gave us the guidance of what those guiding principles are, which are the same guiding principles that we use when we think of student temporary housing. And we move forward with that and looking at safety concerns. Another example would be at Santa Clarita, where we had to spend, I want to say it was like $35,000 on asphalt work. That we made that decision to do that work after we had already made the decision as a board to move forward with the rolling enrollment changes, right? Where one grade of kids would not attend and it would continue to roll up. There were questions posed at that time as to why would we spend that money on the site? But it was done for safety reasons. The cracking is a tripping hazard. And as long as we're still going to use the site and still have humans on the site, we need to make sure that they're safe. And unfortunately, that costs $35,000 to fix. So we had to spend the money.
But those two examples are a perfect illustration of how complicated each of these small and large decisions can be. Because yeah, we do need to make the most fiscally responsible decisions. But at the same time, we can't look at a generation of students and say, sorry, you hit us at a bad time, you lose.
Well, I think Mr. Trunky's question about timeline, we mentioned this in the fall when we talked about it. In a perfect world, if you guys could make a decision, and we had all of the money and we could all move forward, it would be almost 6 years before we could really address an actual building, meaning breaking ground and fixing it or tearing the roof off and addressing it. So when you're talking 6 years before you can actually make any moves and you're waiting and waiting and waiting for those maintenance moments, you very well could outlast whatever the recommended time frame is on a paint job
Mhm.
in the time it will take us to be able to address it.
And then when we are looking to procure funding from this state program as well as others, because we're gonna have to get the funding from somewhere else one way or another. Did I hear correctly? It makes most sense to get that process started now because the state funding probably isn't gonna increase. It's only gonna,
But you can't get in line until your project is approved.
okay, I see.
And then you
Alright.
have to have all the plans and everything in place to get in line.
And then you hope and pray there's not a code change, but you know when those are gonna be, right? Because then
Right.
it has to go for review again.
So looking at it from a taxpayer point of view, we did just ask for and spend a lot of Measure EE money. And now if we're looking at securing funding through a bond or something else, the thought that maybe we should wait when it comes to terms of getting in line, that funding is probably only going down is what I'm saying. So maybe we should wait, give our taxpayers a break, would actually be counterproductive because then they would be on the hook for more because the state would probably reduce the level of funding that they'd be willing to give us. Is that what?
I don't know.
Okay.
We are in the process of paying off a bond, not Measure EE, but
Mhm.
Measure E.
And so we were hopeful that in the future, the change in that would sort of be almost a wash
Can I make it
for the
back?
taxpayer
Okay.
payer.
Mhm.
So it wouldn't be actually paying for 3, you'd still be paying for 2.
Mhm.
Hopefully that would be helpful. And so we're trying to time that, but we haven't made any decisions on that yet because we still have to do the American with Disabilities Act work. We have to get the next round of DSA information because if they say nay to a rehabilitation, then it's going to change what we have to, the money that we need.
And by then we'll have a good or a better understanding of how many TK students we'll see next
Yeah.
year.
That's another piece of this that is a real challenge. We're trying to address our current TK needs, but we're putting TK classes in, and that's transitional kindergarten for all of you that are out there. Those are 4-year-olds. Sometimes when the new law is fully implemented, they will be 3-year-olds for the first few months of school. In classrooms, we're putting them in our kindergarten classrooms because we need to have restrooms that are readily accessible for students who really you wouldn't just let wander around the campus to go to the restroom on their own. Well, the 5-year-olds that are in kindergarten are now being moved into first grade classrooms, which typically they would have a restroom in their classroom. And so it's addressing all of those needs, and that wasn't necessarily funded either. But it's hard to say, do we need new buildings? Or like in the case of Rosedale and Rio Vista, they're recommending that we build new kindergarten buildings. If we were to do that, we would want to address the TK needs as well with those new buildings. That would mean we wouldn't rebuild exactly what's on Cedar, on Rio Vista and Rosedale's campus. We probably would build something a little bigger, a little different to make sure that we could encompass all of the needs of the kids.
It's a lot of moving parts with still a lot of stuff that we just don't know. And so I'm going to come full circle and say I'm really glad that we're having this meeting tonight because as we become aware of stuff, we need to make sure that our school teams and our community stay on top of it as well and can participate in helping us make these decisions. Tough items, tough questions and high dollar amounts.
Yes.
Not easy, but I appreciate you both. Thank you very much.
So juggling 3 or 4 balls is not enough. You have to learn to juggle 5 or 6, right? Okay, you've answered this question a couple of times tonight, and I'm gonna ask it again because you know how I feel about government funding. So just to be clear, in columns F1 and I1, the estimated rehabilitation and estimated replacement costs are actual estimates based on what it would really take to do that, right?
So F1 is the updated cost to rehabilitate the building.
Right. And I1 is the estimated replacement cost.
Correct, but that's really just $867 times the square footage of that building.
And I can't emphasize enough that those estimated costs are to build
Same exact
basically
building.
the 60-year-old structure that's there
Right.
again,
Okay.
just so that it won't fall down in an earthquake.
Okay. But what they're gonna potentially fund us on is 50% of column E1, which are just arbitrary numbers come up with by the OPSC, which is based on maybe average of the state, which would include not only LA County where costs are higher, but other counties where costs are lower.
Only if that ratio is higher than 50%,
Right.
right? If it's lower than 50%, that means they're gonna pay you half of the rehabilitation cost.
Okay, the actual rehabilitation cost. But either way, I just want to note that our estimated replacement cost is 867 and theirs is for a regular 477. So at the most, we would get half of 477 and then have to turn around and pay 67
Yes.
per square foot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay,
So,
so 50% is just a completely meaningless percentage.
yeah, yes,
It's a nice help. It will not fund the project.
unless you're talking about rehabilitation, right? It's more accurate there.
Okay, that was it.
Any other, and just so you know, in March, we will bring a recommendation. Unlike we've done before. In the past, we've taken board direction, but now we're looking at higher dollar amounts and going to DSA. And so we're going to ask for board action. We'll do that in March. And then again, there are next steps with all of these moving pieces, whether it be looking at future boundaries for schools, which I just want to say, because people always ask me about this, we approve interdistrict transfers on the regular. So while we do have boundaries, we approve those movements. I don't want anybody to panic on that part. But looking at how those Davis demographic things will impact us and how they change over the years and how they have changed over the years. So this is multiple presentations that will keep coming back and asking you to take a bite each time to address it. And then ultimately it will be the community that helps us decide if we get to finish the meal or not.
I have one more question. So you've mentioned a few times that the numbers here that we're looking at are to build the same school that we already have. Do we have an estimate? I mean, I know you said between 40 and 45 million for a brand new elementary school. So that's what we would be looking at if we were like leveling Cedar Creek, for example. But do we have an estimate for all of the school sites if we were to move forward with design plans that we would want to move forward with, as opposed to the same exact thing we have?
The big question mark is where the buildings are located and where are the utilities. So when I talked about it with the architects the first time, it was, well, you know, your power's coming in here, you're gonna have to move it here. That's gonna be this much. Your sewer's here, you're gonna have to move it here. It gets so, I guess, complicated that you really have to have like a site plan, right? So like that Cedar Creek drawing, we could get a good estimate based on that. But all the other sites, there's gonna be a lot of those questions that are gonna pop up that will influence the estimated cost of actually doing that work.
And each month that we wait, it changes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Well, every time we talk about AB 300, we always end with this slide. This is a quote from a report from DGS, and it says, public school buildings in California are the safest in the nation. They exceed the seismic standards required for most other buildings and have proven to provide a level of protection that assures the safety of California's public school children. Since the passage of the Field Act in 1933, no school has collapsed due to a seismic event. People that raise their hand. Okay. Well, before we get into new buildings, I wanted to bring in Mr. Sandifer. He's one of our project managers. I'll bring him in. I'm gonna bring in Kathy.
And just for members of the public who are watching, if you have additional questions and you want them addressed, please email Mr. Heinlein or myself. We're happy to answer them and meet with you. We're also planning, another phase eventually of school visits where we talk about this again ad nauseum, review one more time for everybody, because it's ever changing. But we encourage you to reach out, which is another reason why we had this special meeting tonight rather than sandwich it into all the other district business.
And they can find your email on our district website.
They can find our email on our district website. It's chawkins@saugususd.org or nheinlein@saugususd.org. But you can also find it on the website.
Okay, so our facilities team is at the CASH conference at the California Adequate School Housing.
That's right.
I'm sorry.
That's right. I just forgot.
Yeah, so they're with us virtually. All of these individuals have a personal stake in our district. They all live in our district. They all have spouses, children, grandchildren that attend our schools. So I always lean on them to make sure that what we're doing is right. And I appreciate each and every one of them.
Family members that work in our schools in a variety of capacities.
Yeah.
So they're very invested.
Okay, so I first wanted to share, I gotta move this. Sky Blue Mesa. Up above is a picture of the rendering before we started construction. Down below is what the building, it's kind of current. That was in the middle of February, what it looks like. It includes a library, a flex classroom science lab, and that picture is of the library. 6 classrooms. We started the project March 10th. Finish date is now estimated to be May 1st. Total budget for this project, $8.6 million. Team, do you have any fun facts you'd like to share?
Just that the date is actually a little further along besides May 1st. It's actually, we're going to go to the board with a change order for time. But no, that is correct facts that you've stated, Nick, and it's coming along pretty good. It's pretty exciting. And yes, I am a stakeholder. I have family members that work here, and I'm very protective over the district, I'm sure, as all of you know.
I think it's really important. The team works really hard with everyone. The last 2 winters, we've had some rain that even in this drought-ridden state that we're in has been unprecedented for a while. So to be in the middle of construction during that has extended out some of our timelines. We've also been suffering from a pandemic. So even though we started this building in March of 2021, supply chain issues and staffing issues are real for contractors as they move forward, and they've created challenges for all of us.
Yeah, you see Kathy shaking her head too. She has definitely had to endure that on some of her projects as well.
Yeah, this building actually started in the middle of COVID. And just for example, we used to be able to order concrete and get it like 2 days later. Now we have to order concrete almost a month in advance. So that just gives you an idea how the shortages we've had to deal with during COVID, labor and materials and steel. It's just endless. And of course, cost escalation has been pretty dramatic during this time as well. So, and that keeps pushing our projects out further and further. Plus
But
the rain.
I think that was also an important part with Measure EE. Measure EE was passed in 2014. It wasn't until really 2018-19 that we saw the major building in construction. And we've really pushed hard to get those pieces done so that we could maximize the what the dollar for Measure EE buys. It's very common, unfortunately, in a lot of districts that when a bond is passed, a lot of the projects don't get funded because of escalation costs. But because of this mighty little team who lives in our area and Mr. Heinlein, we're getting it done. So we're excited.
Okay, moving on to Helmers Elementary. Here we have our flex classroom science lab. Up at the top, that's the rendering. That blue building kind of to the left, that's the flex science lab. It has 12 classrooms. There's 2 smaller classrooms for small groups. Start date, August 18th, 2021. Estimated finish date now, June 23rd, 2023. Total budget, $15.7 million. In the lower picture, that's a somewhat current picture. The thing in green, that's the elevator. In case you wanted to know why that thing is green right there. Those are prefabricated and brought in, and a crane drops them right there.
If I may add to that, Nick, as well, too, that just to kind of put this in perspective, how big this building is. Typical home in Santa Clarita, 2,000, or actually more like 1,400 to 2,500 square feet. This building is 14,900 square feet. The campus has currently 17 classrooms, I believe, and we're building 12 classrooms on top of it. So that kind of puts it in perspective.
We replaced how many portables with this classroom building? We removed how many portables?
22 portables that were removed from the campus. So we're able to get them out of the asphalt space as usable space for our kids, and pretty proud of that.
This building is like a cruise ship. It's huge, but it's fantastic.
It's amazing. I'm very honored to be part of this project. Very honored.
And I know this particular project has its own special issues with the size of the campus and the sequence of events that happened to be able to build this building.
Mm-hmm. And we are still fortunate. We're still working with our partnerships with the city because many of our schools were built in the 90s. Those that aren't 50 years old, they were built in the 90s and with the joint use of parks and things. And so this is probably the smallest footprint of a campus that we have. And so making sure that we have appropriate playground space and safe playground space that's fenced in and things like that is something we're working very hard on with the city.
Back in the 90s, schools were kind of designed to blend in with the community
and share those park spaces and not have fences that go all the way around them, secure them. And
because
that's
at that
changed
point, we
radically.
weren't really worried about the community wandering onto our campus.
Yes.
There is an old drawing of an NPR at Helmers. It's larger than the one that was there now, but it was in the park. Really, so it was really that tied to the community. Okay, moving on to Rosedale Elementary. There's a flex classroom science lab here, 7 classrooms, start date March 23rd, 2022. Finish date currently estimated October 4th, 2023. Total budget $13.5 million. The picture at the top is that larger entrance space. You can see the diagonal beam at the top that kind of shows that. And then down below is the rendering of what that space will be when the project is complete.
Yeah, and I'll just say that on this project, we were able to remove 13 portables from the site, and they were buildings that were in need of replacement.
And I think it's important to remember that Measure EE was predicated on that being a major portion of the bond, was the removal of aging portables and the implementation of newly built classroom spaces. So we tried to stay true to that all the way through.
And the number of classrooms, right? Because, we just saw some have 12, some have 7. Really is a factor in the educational specifications that the district has, where the preference was that school sites house between 700 and 750 students. So whereas we took off 12 portables from Rosedale, we only needed 7 more to bring us up to that preferred district standard of being able to house that many kids.
Well, and
Oh, you muted again.
if I can also, did I unmute myself? Okay, if I can also add, if you look at the total budget for the single story building at Sky Blue, you showed it at 8.5 million. And that was started literally 1 year before this building. So you can see how construction costs have escalated just in that 1 year. So as we talked about before with AB3, or you guys talked about with AB 300, that's what we're seeing is these escalations.
Okay, moving on to James Foster. This is our newest building that is not started. It's has a flex classroom. That's the building all by itself on the right. Then there's 12 other classrooms in the large 2-story building. Estimated start date, April 24th of this year. Estimated finish date, January 10th, 2025. Total budget, $20.9 million. Anything else?
Yeah, and then also to put that in perspective, that's basically the same size as Helmer's almost, you know? And so when you looked at the cost factor between the two in such a short amount of time, as Kathy said, so that's what seems to keep happening.
This building is also slated to be the coolest 2-story building on any elementary school campus. If you can see the slide going from the 2nd story down. I'm sure if you attend James Foster, you'll always remember that your school had a slide.
I want to be the first to go down it.
It's real important that when we look at these buildings, that we also remember, you know, where we removed a number of portables. James Foster would be a school where we'll be removing 10 portables, and we're looking at 12 classrooms on that campus. We decided, as we've been looking at this AB 300 and hearing what we need with Entrada, and the possible housing needs we would have for students, that we removed some of the flexible sort of office spaces from that building and added some classroom space. So it wasn't like we added square footage, but we did repurpose so that we could house some additional students if and when we decided to change some boundaries. So that's why you're seeing that size space there.
Okay, next up is projects that are either in process or recently finished. These are also projects that we recently shared with our Citizens Oversight Committee at a meeting. All right, Kathy.
So this is a project that I think we're all super excited to see get off the ground. This is preschool inclusion playground at Bouquet Canyon. And so you can see that it has ramps for accessibility. And as Dr. Hawkins had pointed out before, this yellow car, the kids can actually get in their wheelchairs. So we're very excited to see this. It's going to be completely covered by a shade structure similar to the one that's to the right. So it will be totally shaded for the kids, and surrounding the area is still a tricycle path, and it's going to be a really fun space for them.
Think of a glider ride pirate ship thing that goes back and forth. That's what that little car does. And it allows walkers and wheelchairs and kids with braces and maybe crutches and things to participate in it with their typical peers. And this is the same, this is a very similar structure that we have installed at Mountain View for the same reason.
So cool. Okay.
You know what, go back though. This is really important, I think, for the community to understand. This is at our Bouquet Canyon Elementary School site. We're currently using that site as temporary housing for Rosedale, as well as possibly for other schools that we're doing building at. However, in the future, it is going to become our early education site for our preschool SDC or special education preschool classes, as well as our for fee preschool classes, so that we can have integration and mainstreaming of special education students and general education students together. It's what we call our typical peers program. And so we'll have that come together. And we're really excited about this project because it was a campus that was no longer used. It couldn't be used to house 750 students. It's no longer being used for that purpose, but the campus has been refreshed using other dollars, which has saved us money in Measure EE to do other projects with, which again is something we look very closely at and try to be very responsible with, is normally in, let's say the case of Rosedale, we would have had to remove the portable buildings to build the new building and then put other portables on the campus in another space temporarily, which would have been in the millions of dollars for that, only to remove them again and have nothing left to show for it. So what we've been trying to do with some of our housing pieces is avoid wherever we can needing to do temporary housing that would take millions of dollars from the fund for actual new building and new construction, and either squeeze kids in where we can or rehouse them at a campus like this.
That was a situation that did happen at West Creek, although it was not Measure EE. dollars.
Correct.
Yes.
It's just temporary housing is extremely costly. And it's something that school districts that are building new campuses, it really is a waste of fund. It's millions of dollars and you get nothing out of it other than housing the kids for that time period.
So having that Bouquet site was really kind of serendipity that in order to do the work that needed to be done through Measure EE, we had this space that was much cheaper to update. And we did want to update it because the kids that attend that campus deserve a beautiful school too.
Well, and in the community, you know, when you own a campus, even though it's been closed for 10 years or 12 years, you're still responsible for the campus. And after a while, it starts to look a little beat up, but Mrs. Bellina's here from Rosedale and Rosedale North, and it is an absolutely adorable little school now. The way it's painted, the new lunch structures, all the new flooring and everything. And it's going to be the perfect location for our preschools because the kids are only there for a couple of years. It's in a nice little quiet neighborhood. It'll be all set up, for preschool kids. And so we're really excited about it for the
Good use of
future.
Property.
Great. Next up, Cedar Creek Elementary interior paint. This is one of those examples of doing a project at a school site that potentially in the future we have to do some major work at. But again, this is, I didn't put the before picture in here. But the rooms really need to be refreshed. Peter, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, just exciting to provide our students in that community with freshly painted restroom buildings and classroom buildings. These rooms, you know, hadn't been painted in, you know, about 20 years, and some of the paint was, you know, chipping and peeling away. So just to be able to provide that pride for us and for our students, and something that says that we care about you, and a project that we're happy to complete.
It also complements the new lighting that we've installed during COVID, the new Top Cat systems for microphones that we've installed. We're looking at, if you look in the backs of the rooms, the cabinetry is extremely old. It's a good 25 to 30 years old. Probably it is another piece that possibly needs to be replaced. And then, of course, the flooring. And so it seems like simple things, but these are things that do wear out. And we're talking about a long period of time. And so regardless of what the decision will be and what the funding source will be and how long that takes us all to make those determinations, the kids that, I mean, you could enter that school next year in kindergarten and leave it in 6th grade and have no new campus. And so that, I think, was what the board earlier said. That doesn't seem fair to the kids of the community that you could go there for 7 years and still be waiting.
Ms. Grease and I visited this campus recently with you, and I was struck with how absolutely beautiful it is and how unique each different space is. It's really cool.
We like it.
Okay. Oh. Also at Cedar Creek Elementary is the casework, which you can see in the picture in the middle, and then the single point of entry. So on the left and the right, or actually on the left, that used to be a solid door that you couldn't see through, and it was always propped open. So now we changed it to all glass. We have our AB3 or AD 300 lock on it. So, works with the fob. And then on the right is the door to the health office also. So it makes the office have our typical single point of entry. Okay. Then when we get to emblem, we're also working on a single point of entry. We're calling it phase 2. This is where, the first phase or the first phase of single point of entry was really making sure that everyone was directed to the office. Now, the second phase is really once they're in the office, they can't go anywhere else unless they're buzzed or allowed in. So this is the rendering that the architect SGH is working on or off of at this point to move us forward at emblem with creating this second phase of their single point of entry.
And that safety feature is something that we've discussed with different law enforcement agencies as well as our insurance. It's the idea of creating barriers once you get onto a campus for you to get further or deeper into the campus. So as Mr. Heinlein was saying, phase 1 was really controlling that everyone enters the campus through the office. And now phase 2 is to put the barriers in place once you've entered the office, including the barrier of getting into the office, which is our camera and buzzer system.
Okay, moving on to Kathy's, one of her favorite projects is the Mountain View Solar Lunch Shelter.
So this project actually was a lot of fun. You can see in the upper left-hand corner, that picture was the demolition. Part of what made this project really amazing is that this lunch structure had lattice on the top. It was a really weird shape and there were posts everywhere in the center, making it really hard for them to have lunch tables set up. Just trying to stick with the weird shape that it was. And there was never, even if it was lightly sprinkling, the students could not be underneath that structure. So this new lunch structure is solar, but it's also completely waterproof for them. It's humongous. They call it their lunch pavilion. And the campus they absolutely love it. You can see in the bottom sets of pictures where they have their lunch tables set up. The custodian, the last time I was there, which was just a couple days ago, last week, was telling me how happy he is with just the amount of space that the kids have, how easy it is to keep the area clean now because he doesn't have to go around the posts. I mean, just all the way around, the campus is so excited to have this new space.
Okay. Also at Mountain View, we're working on adding additional restrooms in the primary building. Right now, I believe there's 4 or 5 toilets, and we're going to increase that count by quite a few. This building also houses our moderate to severe program, and there really just isn't enough appropriate restrooms for all of those students. So this is being designed right now. So we'll be really happy when it gets finished. Moving on to North Park Elementary, on the left is a picture of the Flex Classroom Science Lab in the middle of doing a bunch of work to it. And then on the right is the finished picture of the space after the flooring has been put in and the furniture's in there, and our electrical outlets are in the ceiling.
I think is important with this one, and you would have seen it if you saw the before pictures of Cedar Creek, the movement to a 21st century space. So 5 years ago, the board asked, or prior to 5 years ago, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, the board was looking for identical spaces. 5 years ago, they gave Mr. Heinlein and I the permission to make comparable spaces. So the goal was that all spaces would have the same look and feel as a brand new building if we were to, because we just finished the new building space at West Creek. And I would have to say that I think we've nailed it with the buildings looking fresh, new, up to date, usable, accessible. With those caveats there. So thank you.
Yeah, on the left, you can see all the boxes on the floor because that room was a computer lab. So I'd take all those out. But you know, it's just another example of how things change.
And now we have them all on the ceiling, which allows for elimination of tripping hazards, ease of flexibility of the classrooms, and still having kids be able to have access to power for projects.
Okay, I left this slide in because Kathy likes it.
I do actually really like this, because this just shows the extra step that we were able to go with the solar. So across the district, we've been really excited. Highlands, the principal there actually got on the loudspeaker and announced the exact minute that the solar was turned on. It was really exciting. The kids were all clapping, and it was an exciting moment. And so as I've gone to the different campuses, I have had trends where sometimes the kids are asking me, what are you doing? What are you doing in my lunch shelter? How come, you know, what's happening here? And so it was really cool that the contractor agreed to come in and sit down with the students. This particular one was at Plum Canyon, and they did 4 assemblies for our students. And they brought fidget spinners for the kids to get to take home, and talked about how solar works. So it was definitely a fun time. So we do get to do some fun things like that.
And I appreciate that, Kathy. I think this is something that sometimes we lose. We talk about buildings and how they need to be safe and they need to be efficient and they need to be beautiful, but they are, while inanimate, they're part of the school community. And I love how the kids not only learned about it, but they interact with this.
Well, they've all been
solar structure.
really interested in the buildings that we've done. And so, for example, at Plum Canyon, where we had the new classroom structure, well, at all the schools, we've tried to have little portals through the fence where we could, so that the kids could watch, because there's nothing more fun than to watch like the big earth movers and cranes and those kinds of things, you know, building on your school. So where it was appropriate, we did that as well.
Okay. Here is the lunch shelter and solar on top of the new building at Plum. Kathy, you want to say anything?
Well, it's actually further along. The lunch shelter is just about complete. We have some additional work to do around it, but the kids actually had their first lunch under it today. So that was very exciting. Again, this one is also waterproof. Something that the kids haven't had there. That one did have a solid structure. It was definitely another one with posts throughout. So they were able to put their tables all together and not have all the breaks in there because of the pillars in the middle. But very exciting. The rooftop, also really a neat addition to the new building.
And if I could just add, these structures are going to be maintenance free with the roofs for many, many, many years. A lot of these shade structures either had lattice or it had a shade cloth, and it was just a constant
Yeah,
maintenance.
see, there's the holes. I'm sorry, Peter. I was talking to Nick.
Okay, moving on. This is another project at Plum. I'll just leave this here for their single point of entry as well. All the changes we've been looking at in order to achieve that phase 2 single point of entry. Then more solar. Here's Sky Blue Mesa Elementary. There's solar lunch shelter. I know it's further along too, right, Kathy?
It's a little bit further along than this. We did, we talked about some of the delays that we've had with construction. This project was delayed because the roofing material came in and some of it was damaged. And so to reorder, that it put a 2-month delay on us. So when we talk about the delays that we're still experiencing, that's a raw material that we're having a hard time getting. So, but you can see in the picture on the right, they demolished the existing shelters and we were actually able to save those with future plans to reuse those. I believe at maintenance at the M&O yard to be able to store some of the materials underneath. But the lunch shelters, which are actually similar to the shelters that are going on the outside of the new building at Sky Blue, are they're way bigger than the old shelters that they had. And you can see on these projects, we don't have any of the fabric on the fencing, so the kids are watching the whole thing, and they cannot wait to get out there.
Also at Sky Blue, we finished their front office casework and single point of entry there as well. You can see the doors like we put up at Cedar Creek into the office or into the health office and then into the staff room. Moving on to West Creek, there's solar and benches. This is another one of Kathy's projects that she's happy to talk about.
So these pictures I had shared before with our Citizens Oversight Committee, specifically because the solar was finished a while ago. We're still waiting for a part. We're hoping that that's going to come in at the beginning of March and that this will be able to be energized soon. We have to get in line with Edison. And so Edison runs at its own pace. So hopefully that will happen soon. But I actually brought this picture to the Citizens Oversight Committee because as we talk about construction, sometimes we have some crazy things happen. And so the picture that's up on the upper left-hand corner is these two 2-inch conduits for electrical for the solar that had to go into this building, which is where the electrical room is. And the footing for the building is that wide, causing these pipes to stick out of the wall 27 inches into the walkway. And so as a construction team, we sat there and scratching our heads trying to figure out what we were going to do to try to make this into something that wasn't just utilitarian and covering the pipe so somebody doesn't trip, but can add to the beauty of the school. And so we came up with the solution of the benches, which is on the upper right-hand corner picture, where you can see we picked that specific bench because it was the right height to sit over. They built that box and stuccoed it. And we added the second bench around the corner to kind of make it uniform and to keep it from being a tripping hazard for someone walking around the corner fast. But we were really excited with how it came out. And so sometimes we have to come up with these creative solutions, and it's amazing that we get to do that to try to continue the excellence in our schools with not just the education, but with the construction and just what you see.
Thank you. Another project we're working on at West Creek is also their phase 2 for their single point of entry. So you'll walk in the existing front doors, and then you'll need to be able to be buzzed in by staff on the other side of the counter. And with that, are there any questions and comments?
Ms. Love.
No questions, but it's super exciting to see all of the work. I recently went with Dr. Hawkins to North Park and to Mountain View. That solar lens structure is ginormous, and it looks really nice there. I'm super excited about the preschool program and the new equipment there. We got to see the rocker sort of toy that's similar at Mountain View, and it was so cool. And that whole play structure over there is really awesome for inclusion. So no questions, but thank you so much for sharing and a lot of really exciting stuff.
It's a good comment. It's great to see all of these projects now coming to fruition after having worked on the master plan 7 years ago.
I as well don't have any questions, but a couple of kudos. First of all, on the presentation on each slide, thank you for providing the funding source where everything's coming from. I really appreciated that. And then when it comes to the phase 2 single point of entry at each of our schools, we had conversation about the front of our schools and security. And I and my colleagues expressed some concerns. Personally, I understand, and school safety is top priority for all of us, but we don't want to build our schools to be the fortress that a medieval castle is. We want our schools to still be welcoming and beautiful. And as these spaces are rolling out, they are just that. They are extremely secure, while at the same time, they say to our families, welcome, we want you here. And I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Lovely presentation. Kathy, I really appreciate your artisticness that you guys added with the benches. That was nice. I have one question. The see-through doors, what kind of glass is that?
I don't know the spec on the see-through doors. Does anyone know it off the top of their head?
Tempered glass.
Tempered.
Thanks. Thank you for.
Bulletproof would be a heavier door than probably could open really easy. So.
Yeah. Thank you for a great presentation. A lot of information. Any closing comments?
I just, it's a process, and I think we've been blessed as a school district to have the community approve Measure E years ago, Measure EE again years ago, but having that ability every time whether it's we talk about safety in our schools, and I talk with the local sheriff's department, it's always we have that, which is an amazing thing to do. And it's been quite a gift from our taxpayers and the community to do that. And so as we move forward with this next challenge that we have to face, we'll work together to make sure that we're being conscious of that great gift and that great privilege that they may give us, but also really responsible to the safety of our students, our staff, our community, and making sure that we have spaces that last for the next 60 years in our community. So thank you to Santa Clarita.
Thank you. So, our next meeting is next Tuesday, 3 weeks in a row.
Come on a regular date.
I have a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Meeting is, we don't have to vote on that, right?
You have
Yes.
to vote.
Oh, all in favor?
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned at 8 p.m.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all for
Thank you.
coming.